Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war, I guess, breaking news, geopolitics update, analysis, whatever you want to call it. We're going to be looking at negotiations between ostensibly Russia and the US, with or without Zelensky, with or without Europe. All the permutations apply here. There are different desires from each player in this. And we're going to talk about that, analyze what is going on, and also what Russia might be trying to achieve in what they're saying. We're going to first look at the context, and the most important context initially is the economic one. And this could be forcing Russia into negotiations um, in a way that we haven't seen previously, because I think they are on an economic precipice. All the indicators, all the canaries in a coal mine have suffocated, I think, and Russia is in a desperate position. But they also, the other important context to these kind of peace negotiations and discussions that are going on, the other important context is that Vladimir Putin last week reiterated the same maximalist intentions. And really, I think Russia is playing this game of stringing out the uh, the talks to their advantage. And I agree with Anders Puck Nielsen, who has a video out on this today, that they are going to force Ukraine into a corner by suggesting some unrealistic objectives, uh, you know, non-negotiables or whatever, and Ukraine will be forced to say no, and then the US will look at Ukraine and say, well, you're not playing ball, and you're not putting your weight in these negotiations and agreeing, so actually this is your fault that we're not getting anywhere. And then you'll see, I think this is what Russia will intend, you'll see the US turn on Ukraine and kind of side with Russia. I think that's what's going to go on. But and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of these ideas of maybe partial ceasefire in the air and whatnot. But anyway, we'll start with the economics here. So, Russia, their deficit is going to increase to 6 to 9 trillion rubles. That is insane. The government will rewrite the budget for the second time in a year due to a drop in raw materials revenues. And indeed, when we look at the budget surplus or deficit in billion rubles, at the moment it's 5 trillion rubles, and 5,000 billion, so 5 trillion rubles. 6 to 9, it's going to go down. Now, this is the 2025 line, the bright red one here. That is not looking good for Russia. And considering there's this period at the end of the year, November, December, where every previous year has shown a real dip in the budget deficit, I think you add that onto what might then be, I don't know, at that time, something far lower than 5. You could end up seeing Russia in some real trouble. And another graph from Evgen Istribin here, according to the results of 7 months of deficit, is 4.879 trillion rubles. This is more than the entire history of Russia, and this is a deficit for only 7 months. At this rate, the deficit by the end of the year could be 9 to 10 trillion rubles. Wow. So that is a difficult situation for the Russians. So you need to understand that they are going into these negotiations with this baggage, and it's also quite publicly known. Like, this isn't just something that maybe Putin might not know about, right? The Russian central bank has warned that they are the Russian economy is facing near zero growth by the end of 2025 as the war-driven growth fades, which is to say the war economy is no longer stimulating the larger economy. That making tanks to throw them to the front line to get blown up isn't the best way to stimulate your economy, and that there are people right across the society who are not getting investment in their lives. I often talk about trickle up economics rather than trickle down. Trickle down is the idea that you give billionaires tax breaks and they can earn even more money, and then that extra money will trickle down to the poor people at the bottom. Some used to be known in Victorian times as horse and sparrow. That the horse would eat the oats, and then the sparrows would pick at the oats after it defecates them out or whatever. The idea that the poor people scrap for the end result of rich people using that money, but it's not a very good way. I mean, all the data is in, really. It's not a good way of stimulating the economy. I would rather stimulate the economy by welfare to poor people. People don't like it in terms of it's quite divisive, but actually poor people generally go out and spank their money. They don't save it. They spend it in the local economy, and there you go. And that's a good way to you put that together with some infrastructure, New Deal type stuff. You've got some Keynesian economics, and I think that's probably a more successful way um, of stimulating the economy. I'm saying that because that's not what is happening in Russia. So with Russia, they're just using all the money to support the war efforts. They're attracting people with huge wages to join the army, but either not being able to pay them or whatever. But that's where all the money is, and the hospitals, the education system, the infrastructure, it's all falling apart, and that's where they need the investment. And that creates jobs and money, and people with money in their pockets. People don't have money in their pockets at the moment because they're scrimping and saving, or they're not spending on the rest of the economy. And this is what the slowdown reflects the limits of Russia's war fund fueled expansion, driven by military spending at the expense of civilian investment and private consumption. That's exactly it. So that's their problem. Um, Now, Tammy Bruce here, the spokesperson for the State Department, says it's about the economy. Is the economy stupid? US tariffs may be forcing Putin to reconsider stance on Ukraine peace talks. President Trump has made it clear that he's willing and capable of moving forward on some economic actions, said Tammy Bruce. And as I said in my previous video, this is really frustrating because that realization should have been there on the 21st of January. This is Trump's. I get really frustrated that we appear to know more about Russia's economic and geopolitical situation than the entire Trump administration. What is going on there that we can make better decisions on behalf of the United States and Ukraine, geopolitically speaking. So deeply frustrating that it's taken so long to come to this realization. Nonetheless, they're here now, and they realize the weakness of the Russian economy, and that's why you're seeing Trump wield his executive order um, far too liberally, I would say, but in this case, pretty well against India. Indian state owned refineries have again temporarily suspended purchasing oil from Russia after Trump signed an executive order imposing additional 25% tariffs on Indian goods for energy cooperation with the Kremlin, according to Bloomberg. Now, that will put added pressure on Russia as the US will want to divide the BRICS nations away from Russia. And Russia would want to consolidate the BRICS nations as a united front against the United States. So there are larger political games at play here. You might argue. The Trump administration is also considering new sanctions against Russia's shadow oil tanker fleet, according to the Financial Times, if Putin does not agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine by Friday, according to the Financial Times. Now, 21st of January should have been like by the 21st of February, if there's no ceasefire, then we're going to whack sanctions on like Trump claimed he would do. But he waited 7 months because he thought ridiculously that he could manipulate Putin, that he knew Putin, that Putin liked him, they had a good relationship, and he could bring the war to an end within a day or whatever. In fact, is it here? Yes. I'm going to go to this. I had this info later. So, US official said to The Atlantic, Trump had truly believed that his relationship with Putin would bring about a quick end to the conflict in Ukraine. But instead, Putin has been taken advantage of Trump's deference to him and has openly defied the president, quote, embarrassed him. So I've maintained many times that Trump truly believed he would solve the war within one day. He said it something like 23 times at different rallies. He claimed later it was sarcasm, that he was only joking. No, he wasn't. He claimed that in all seriousness. There's never once a hint of a joke. And he said, I'd even do it before the inauguration. He didn't do it. And then later admitted that, it's much more difficult than I thought, because he didn't understand. I think the Trump administration fundamentally do not understand global geopolitics. I think they came in with this ideological agenda that was attached to, or was developed from Project 2025 thinking. And And I think the rubber hit the road. There was a kind of like reality hit them, was like, oh, the world doesn't work like this. And Tucker Carlson's understanding of Russia isn't actually accurate. And Trump thinking that he could bend Putin to his will wasn't going to happen. Um, Trump signed off on sanctioning India this week because he was already annoyed at the lack of progress of a trade deal with Delhi. Trump is still considering how and whether to directly punish Putin if Moscow doesn't hit tomorrow's deadline. I just think that there's a great naivety in a Trump administration. Okay, so that's all the context. Now, we get on to what Donald Trump said about the meeting between Steve Witkoff when he met Kirill Dmitriev in the Kremlin, went for a walk around Moscow, and then met Putin for 3 hours yesterday. Remember, the extra context we need to know is that Steve Witkoff is a golf buddy of Trump and a real estate mogul, and he is not serious about this job, or is it he's not adequately trained, doesn't have the requisite knowledge. He's even possibly compromised by having family line connected to the Soviet Union in times past. So, yeah, he went on his own to meet with Putin last time and used one of the Kremlin's interpreters. I mean, he was chewed up and spat out by Putin last time, in my opinion, and has regurgitated uh, Russian talking points on people like Tucker Carlson show. Like, this is not the guy to be operating on behalf of the US, let alone on behalf of Ukraine. And yet, you know, bit of nepotism, and he's a guy in one of the most important positions, the envoy, special envoy to Russia. What an insanely important position this guy is in. He didn't even know what the regions were in Ukraine that were being negotiated over. And it's absolutely fundamentally ignorant of what he needs to know. Anyway, my special envoy, Steve Witkoff, just had a highly productive meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Great progress was made. Afterwards, I updated some of our European allies. Everyone agrees this war must come to a close, and we will work towards that in the days and weeks to come. So some people saying, okay, is he extending that time period? August 8th, tomorrow, should be the cutoff time. Is it days and weeks? Thank you for your attention to this matter. He's also kind of moved from 100% tariffs to, as we've seen with India, 25% tariffs. So, and people, reporter questioned him on 100% tariffs, and he said, "Oh, I never said that. I never put a number on it." Yes, you did. You very clearly said 100%. But anyway, so Trump declines to describe that meeting between Witkoff and Putin as a breakthrough. He says more secondary sanctions are likely. Here we have no report saying Putin's aide. This is so the Russian point of view says Russia finds the latest US truce proposal, we'll come on to that, acceptable. The plan would mean a temporary ceasefire, delay decisions on occupied territories for decades, gradual lifting of most sanctions, of course, and possible energy imports, but no promise to limit NATO or end US military aid to Ukraine. So Russia seemed to be like warming to some arguably maybe controversial agreements or proposals, I guess. Um, Trump is to make a decision on the Russian sanctions within the next 24 to 36 hours, said Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, yesterday. Whether they will put those secondary sanctions on other nations in the way that they have been threatening. Trump plans to meet Putin next week. Okay, so this is where we get on to what the hell is going on, who is meeting with whom, and who is not going to be there. So the New York Times reported that Putin is to meet Trump next week and then hold trilateral meeting with Zelensky without European participation. So two separate meetings, it seems, but Europe not being part of any of them. Then we heard that Putin said he has nothing against a meeting in principle with Zelensky, but according to the war criminal, according to Putin, says war translated, certain conditions must be met, and they are still a long way off. In other words, Putin is now saying, yeah, I'll meet with Zelensky, but not until X, Y, and Z are achieved. And of course, those are going to be fairly maximalist objectives that are in Russia's best interest. So, arguably, Zelensky is not going to be wanting to meet Putin if he has to do X, Y, and Z that are really problematic. However, he expressed interest in meeting with Trump. So this is what Putin wants. He wants to meet with Trump because he knows he can chew him up and spit him out. This is what happened in Helsinki in 2018, and it was deeply embarrassing for Trump. But Trump doesn't seem to realize that. He's only come to realize now that maybe Putin has been the puppeteer and Trump has been the puppet. Now, that might then lead Trump to be a little bit angry and frustrated with the situation. That's what we want. We want Trump to realize that they're not mates here. They're not going down a pub and chatting over what they should do with their old friend Ukraine over there. What should we do about him? He's a bit of a problem. Let's, you know, Putin is a former KGB agent, right? You treat him with extreme care and caution, and you do not let him try and manipulate you. But that's what many people are thinking. John Sweeney coming out today and saying, "I can't help but think that Putin is just going to manipulate Trump again." But they're potentially going to meet in UAE. Now, the White House has said, according to ABC News, that they do not confirm any agreements on a Putin Trump meeting. Nothing has been agreed yet because Putin has not given any answer about the talks with Zelensky. And if there's no meeting with Zelensky, then Trump will not agree to a bilateral summit. So the ABC News reporting that Trump is not up for a bilateral meeting. It has to include Zelensky. So that's good news. Question is, will it include Europe? So again, this is exactly where we've been before, though, isn't it? The previous Istanbul arrangements. Now, two messages in the last few hours has stand up. One, Putin meeting with Trump, but without Zelensky. Two, US official meeting between Trump and Putin only after Putin meets with Zelensky. So, there are differing narratives out there. Then we have the analysts talking about Europe. So no Europeans at the table. Zelensky seems to imply he thinks this is a mistake. Yeah, I'd agree, but has little choice. Putin sees the EU, in his recent words, as, quote, an economic giant, but a political lightweight. And Trump has absolutely no intention of allowing anyone else to share in what he sees as his victory. So some are saying that Trump doesn't want Europe to be there because he wants a Nobel Peace Prize, and this is his thing. This is his legacy. But there are others saying that actually Europe might well be at the table now. So the concern, says the analyst, is we must have is that Trump will see the possibility of a ceasefire as being within his grasp. The cost for the Ukrainian territorially will be Ukrainians territorial will be unacceptable, but he'll try to impose it on them to get the win and the peace prize. They'll be stuck between saying no and facing the US cutting off key aid in terms of intel and data and angering Trump for denying him his moment or carrying on the war with just European help. So yeah, this is exactly where we were in the previous Istanbul arrangements. Um, and this could be Russia successfully stringing the Americans out again, or as Trump would say, tapping them out. This is, I suspect, Putin's aim. We're back at square one. He gets, says the analyst, he gets a weaker Ukraine to wage war on. Even if he feels forced into a ceasefire, it will be only a matter of time before some incident after regrouping starts it all up again, very much to Russian advantage. Putin doesn't want the war to end. He's made that very clear. This is a distraction and an effort to stop or slow sanctions and weaken the Ukraine-Washington position. So talking about Europe then, Zelensky said he spoke with German Chancellor Merz. Ukraine and Germany equally see the need to end the war as soon as possible with a dignified peace. And the parameters of the end of the war will determine the security conditions for Europe for decades. This war is in Europe, and Ukraine is an integral part of Europe. We are already at negotiations on joining the European Union. Therefore, Europe must be a participant in the relevant processes. We coordinated our positions with Germany. Also, yesterday, various potential formats for meetings for peace at the level of leaders in the near future were discussed. Two bilateral formats, one trilateral. Ukraine is not afraid of meetings and expects the same bold approach from the Russian side. It is time to end the war. So, of course, bilateral and trilateral doesn't seem to be including Europe. Macron has also said, well, Zelensky said, I spoke with President Macron. We are coordinating our positions and we equally see the need for a common European view on security issues for Europe. The near future must show what the consequences will be if Russia continues to drag out the war and disrupt constructive efforts. So, Ben Wallace, the former UK Defence Minister, Secretary of Defence, sorry, for the Conservatives, did a really good job on Ukraine, has said Britain must be invited to peace talks to stop Zelensky from being bullied by Trump and Putin. And that is the nub. That's the nub. So Europeans will be looking at the potential for Trump to align himself with Putin, Putin to manipulate Trump into both of them bullying Zelensky to um, to compromising on a deal that sees Ukraine worse off than Russia, and Russia essentially get the negotiated win. So Zelensky himself has said all partners understand who should take steps to end this war. This is a Russian war. This is Russian aggression, and it's Russia that should go for a ceasefire and real diplomacy that can guarantee peace. Ukraine is clearly supported, and I'm very grateful to all our partners for this. Everyone is also united by the understanding that Russia's war against Ukraine is a war in Europe and against Europe. All decisions that will be made to end this war and to guarantee security really concern all of Europe, not just one person. So it's a real desire for Zelensky to see Europe involved here. Europe's voice must influence the processes, and we are agreeing with the European leaders both on our conversations and meetings to coordinate all positions, and also on the work of each of us with other leaders so that Europe's positions are protected. We are planning some meetings on the continent. So I guess watch this space. Now, Trump reportedly tells European allies that Zelensky that Putin is open to land swap talks. And I get a little bit uncomfortable with all this. So the comments came during a phone call on August 6th. So yesterday, just 2 days before Trump's deadline um, for Russia to agree to a ceasefire. So there are these proposals that seem to be coming from the US. So Tim White says, I think we should start with the latest from Moscow, he said earlier today, on the first of the meetings which most hope will end the war, but few realists believe. The venue has been arranged. This is from one of Russia's state news agencies. So, state news agency has said Ushakov's main statements about a meeting between Putin and Trump and more. So, again, not Zelensky, Putin and Trump. Russia and the US have agreed to a meeting between Putin and Trump in the coming days. Next week has been designated as a benchmark for this meeting, but it's difficult to say how many days of preparation will take. The venue for the meeting has also been agreed upon and will be announced a little later. Witkoff raised the idea of a trilateral meeting between Putin, Trump, and Zelensky, but Moscow left it unanswered. Russia informs friends and partners about results of Putin-Witkoff meeting. The meeting between Putin and Witkoff was constructive, and further joint work on resolving the Ukrainian crisis was discussed. The Ukrainian crisis. So that's how the Russians read it all. Now, Onet claims to have received the content of the offer voiced by Witkov. So this is an offer from the Americans to the Russians. Ukraine and Russia will conclude not peace, but a truce. De facto recognition of Russian territorial gains by postponing this issue for 49 or 99 years. So essentially, Russia just get to keep those places that they have stolen, lifting most of the sanctions imposed on Russia. How convenient. In the long term, a return to importing Russian gas and oil. Yeah. No guarantees of non expansion of NATO. No promise to suspend military support for Ukraine. So, what Ukraine get is they can still join NATO and they can still get military support. What Russia get is all the territory that they've stolen for the foreseeable future, um, and sanctions being lifted. So, that seems to be very pro Russian to me. So is that something that Ukraine would sign up to? And if it's not, is that then a stick that the US can beat Zelensky with? Alexandre here, so it's a random source, says, I have serious concerns that Putin has once again fed the American delegation a load of nonsense to buy even more time. I really don't want to believe it. Putin is a skilled manipulator and deceiver. He cannot be trusted under any circumstances. That's kind of how I feel. That's why I included that one. Now, Ukraine's RBK Media has published inside info on peace talks. It claims Europe may have a seat at the table after all. Trump is open to the idea, but Putin will object. No date or venue is fixed, though some say UAE. Ukraine supports a sky ceasefire, but Russia has not indicated if it agrees. Now, I think a sky ceasefire would benefit Russia because Ukraine are pummeling, and this is what Anders Puck Nielsen said as well. Ukraine are pummeling Russia very effectively at night or every day at the moment. And although Russia is hitting Ukraine a lot, there's a lot of civilian infrastructure that's hit. Although we're not really sure what goes on, you know, behind these OPSEC barriers. So maybe Russia is really hurting Ukraine in many military ways as well. But I get the sense that Ukraine would love to continue hitting, especially with all these new drones that they're getting with the funding from Germany. They'd love to continue hitting Russia, con- you know, hugely behind Russian lines and inside Russia. Now, we'll come to a synopsis from Timothy Milovanov, who says Trump now plays a central role in Ukraine's war. It's the defining conflict of his presidency. Trump set 24-hour and 100-day ceasefire deadlines, paused aid, then threatened nuclear force. His August 8th ultimatum nears, according to CNN. So after Medvedev mentioned nukes, so this is CNN he's summarizing. After Medvedev mentioned nukes, Trump warned of a US submarines near Russia. In 1 month, he moved from freezing weapons to signaling escalation. Now Trump must choose to impose secondary sanctions on India and China for buying Russian oil, or back down and risk appearing inconsistent on his own deadline. So maybe Trump has been painting himself into a corner here. Trump posted Monday that India profits from reselling Russian crude. India doesn't care how many people are being killed by the Russians' war machine. Uh, Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff travels to Moscow this week, or has done. A Putin meeting may be discussed. Etc., etc. So, like past presidents, says CNN, Trump now faces an inherited crisis he can't ignore. How he acts this week, his acts this week may shape US influence and European security and energy markets going forward. Now, we're going to return to some options that CNN have put for the outcome here, but we're just going to go now to look at some wider concerns that may impact unity in support for Ukraine. So, first of all, Trump on China and Xi. So, we have a very good relationship, said Trump the other day. I'll end up having a meeting before the end of the year, most likely if we make a deal, but we're getting close to a deal. So he still thinks he's made this is his approach to diplomacy. Is he thinks he gets on really well with these people, but I don't think he realizes that these people see him as an enemy and see him as someone to be manipulated or maybe taken advantage of. But at the same time, Trump threatens higher tariffs on the EU if it fails to meet its commitments. So we have this situation whereby still the US is more likely to side with their enemies, their erstwhile enemies, or otherwise enemies, than with their allies, their NATO allies. And speaking of NATO, President Trump said, and it's quite incredible, in a telephone interview, we have the hottest country anywhere in the world by far. And that was told to me by every leader of NATO. They do whatever I want. They do whatever I want. That is absolutely incredible. So he thinks that NATO does whatever he wants, and maybe there's an element of truth there. NATO were Mark Rutte with his kind of daddy quotes, etc., seem to be fawning over him in public, and we're going to return to this idea later. Um, that gives him a sense of. I mean, the question is that reality, or these people laughing behind his back? And what does Trump really think about that relationship? Does he really think that he's dictating everyone? But is he actually functionally dictating all of his allies because they can't do uh, without the US? And then you hear Trump on his EU trade deal. The details are quote. Quote, details are $600 billion to invest in anything I want. Anything. I can do anything I want with it. So we're hearing that Trump says NATO, they do whatever I want. And then he says of the EU trade deal that um, I've got $600 billion of European investment in the US that I can do anything I want with. And you're starting to see, not starting, I mean, we are just continually seeing someone sounding more and more like a dictator that doesn't seem to have a grasp on what's going on. Like that doesn't appear to be the trade agreement with the EU. And then if he gets frustrated, that's not the actual trade agreement, then he starts ramping up sanctions on the EU, where he should be working hand in glove with the EU in unity over issues like Ukraine. As Ron Filikowski says, this is complete fantasy, just an absurd made up lie. The EU is not giving Trump $600 billion to invest any way I want. They aren't giving him $1 to invest. It's just astonishing that a president can go on a financial network and lie like this, and it barely registers. So this is what's going on at the moment, just talking absolute nonsense. Here is another example where Trump said, we're talking in trillions, not billions, trillions and trillions of dollars from other countries. Now they're paying a lot of money and they're paying hundreds of billions of dollars. But I think there's also a possibility that we're taking in so much money that we may very well make a dividend to the people of America. So he seems to be thinking that not only are his tariffs not taxes on the consumer or um, American businesses, but that he's genuinely got these countries around the world to give the US trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And I think the budget deficit is going to tell him a very different story. But there's just this element that he's completely out of whack with reality. And then, this makes me worry about, negotiating with Putin. Putin will just be looking at all of this thinking, man, the guy's on cloud cookie land. I can just really easily take advantage of this. And that, you put together other things like Trump walking on top of the White House roof the other day and shouting at reporters and just like, what are you doing? He's absolutely mental. Biden had done anything like that, people would have gone insane. Like Fox News would have been apoplectic. But it's just weird behavior is completely normalized with Trump. So anyway, CNN gives this analysis of five possible scenarios to end for the end of the war, and I think it'd be useful to walk through these different options out there. So first, Putin agrees to a ceasefire. So this is unlikely as they would see it. Kremlin sees no point in stopping its war, believing that it is winning. So remember, we heard the other day that Putin thought that the Ukrainian front line would crumble within 2 to 3 months. Putin does not plan to stop the offensive until October at the least, and probable capture of Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, and Kupiansk would need to happen or are unlikely to happen. So he's unlikely to go for a quick ceasefire. New negotiations, possible conclusion of new agreements that will actually consolidate current Russian gains. The front may be frozen until winter. In 2026, Russia will be able to resume the war or legalize the occupation through diplomacy. Putin may interfere in the elections in Ukraine. Ukraine is held for another 2 years. Western assistance continues. The situation on the front is stabilizing. A disaster for Ukraine and NATO. It becomes clear that the US is stepping aside. Uh, Ukraine's defense capabilities weakening, increasing mobilization in Russia. A disaster for Putin is another option here in an Afghan scenario. So Russian losses are increasing, successes are minimal, sanctions are intensifying, relations with China and India are deteriorating. The Kremlin is losing financial reserves. Discontent among the elites is growing due to the failure of diplomacy. Now, the thing is that all of these could be kind of true simultaneously, and where does that leave us? I think that Russia's certainly going to try and play the United States. I think they're going to try and force Ukraine to say no to certain agreements or certain stipulations, and that will test Trump's patience. He can he can spin on a dime, um, and I think that that's realistically where we're going to go. I don't think Putin has any intention of a quick resolution to the conflict and a ceasefire. Um, you know. Uh, anytime soon. I think he's still got maximalist intentions, or at least he will want to walk out of this with his head held high, and that would require Ukraine signing up to stuff that they just will not be okay with. And just to throw in some extra bits and pieces here in terms of where Trump is in as a negotiator, as a kind of person, and as a dictator wannabe, and I'm really worried that the US is in a very perilous position at the moment, where you've got someone that is not willing to give $200 million worth of presidential drawdown authority to Ukraine. Right? You've got $200 million. What would you rather spend that on? And he goes to spend it on making a golden ballroom. So, like, just to let you know that the Rose Garden has now been paved over, and that's what it looks like. So, he's paved over the beautiful Rose Garden, famous Rose Garden in the White House. He's paved it over and put some tacky garden tables and chairs there, like it's some kind of crap cafe. Uh, so he's done that. Then he's going to have UFC fight in the White House, maybe. He's going to spend $200 million on a golden ballroom after cutting 17 million Americans' healthcare and taking food away from hungry children with the SNAP projects and whatnot. He's put ornate gold stuff all over the White House. I mean, here is a man that is just a dictator wannabe. You can make a spoof film out of this. It would just honestly, Sacha Baron Cohen, eat your heart out. This is reality. Uh, it's just absolutely staggering. Anyway, uh, we then have, and again, this is pertinent to how easy Trump is to manipulate. And this is what I worry about. You put him in a room with Putin, he will get taken advantage of because Tim Cook can come along and give Trump a slab of gold with a bit of glass whacked into it. So Tim Cook showed up with a made up award, the President Donald J. Trump Apple American Manufacturing Program. Made up award, praised Trump on camera to placate him. So you can go and see this, in the White House. Here he is, Tim Cook and Trump in the White House at the Resolute desk there. Call it fiduciary duty if you want. It was still a pathetic tribute ceremony. So he does all this, praised Trump on camera to placate him, and walked out with a tariff exemption. So you've got a CEO here saying, right, we know, we now know that at different meetings recently. So there's the African leaders meetings with Trump, and he was like they were offering him golf courses at their nations, right? Like everyone now knows overtly. It's almost, is it a joke? No, it's serious. People are actually doing it. Just we can get Trump to do what we want if we offer him some financial reward. He is basically open to be bribed. So Tim Cook from Apple walks in with a slab of gold, whacks it on his table, and walks out with a tariff exemption. Yeah, he's made a pledge of 600, billion dollars or something to onshore Apple's supply chain or something. But there'll be loopholes and all sorts going on there as far as Apple are concerned. They get the tariff exemption, and they've given Trump a bit of gold, and we know he likes gold because he's trying to build a $200 million golden ballroom in the White House, and he's covered the White House in gold. And here he does. Here he gets another piece of gold. Bill Madden said, "Watching Tim Apple blow smoke up the loathsome POS's ass with a $600 billion pledge, an engraved slab of glass, and a block of gold is hilarious. Tim Cook knows exactly how to manipulate the narcissist nut job." But that's the point, right? And the reason I've included this on a Russian video is like, if Tim Cook can do this to Trump and walk away with an exemption, what is the master manipulator, Vladimir Putin, going to be able to do if they have a bilateral meeting? If it's like it was in Helsinki with no one but an interpreter there, no one knows what happened, and he walks out and spouts Russian propaganda to the press that had to be kind of rowed back by the GOP that was slightly more responsible back in 2018. Well, what's going to happen if he does have a bilateral meeting with Putin? What's going to happen if there's a trilateral meeting without Europe, without, as Ben Wallace says, Europe to say, hang on, don't you guys get together and bully Zelensky here? So it's deeply worrying. I think that Trump is eminently vulnerable. I think he is a weak leader. He really is a weak leader. Yeah, he throws around executive orders and he is leveraging all sorts of stuff. But I think, like from a personal point of view, he's weak because he is easily manipulated, and he doesn't realize that his narcissism just does not allow him to self-reflect in a way that should happen, and he won't take feedback, critical feedback from his aides. They'll be too afraid to. We know that they're not giving critical feedback because he still talks about reducing prescription drug costs by 1,500%. And that doesn't mathematically make any sense. You'd be paying people to take drugs. Like 100% is your max. 1,500 is stupid. But that is saying it for the 17th time means that his aides do not correct him. So there's no correction for this man, and that is deeply worrying for me. So I worry about these negotiations because I think it is for Russia to gain from this, and I just hope that Europe is able to put their foot in the door and stop it from slamming and saying, "Hang on, we need to be there." The grown-ups need to be at the table. Anyway, that's enough for me. Let me know what you guys think. Sorry for any delays in output and all sorts. Take care, and I will speak to you soon.